For Keir Starmer, the modern titan of this country who stood on a plinth of integrity, his party laid into Boris Johnson, and now we find yet another suspicious-looking breach of the rules, a breach which he denies. The information coming too late in the day for it to be scrutinised, and it would seem that his party are so unpopular that they're now moving the goalposts so you can't get rid of them. Let's start with integrity. Christmas Eve, an alleged trip to Sir Keir's private voice coach. Not that it would help, mind.
I call again for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza, the return of the sausages, the hostages.
Definitely needs more work. But frankly, who would need to use a private voice coach on Christmas Eve? In my view, this is on a par with Dominic Cummings testing his eyes. Apart from the actual emergency services, who's working late the night before Christmas? Voice coaching is hardly an essential service. They're not really key workers, are they? This is almost as bad as the excuse that he gave explaining why he wasn't in his own house during lockdown, despite telling everyone to stay at home.
In my office, working on the expected Brexit deal. With my team, we had to analyse the deal as it came in at speed, prepare and deliver a live statement at speed on one of the most important issues for our country in recent years. That's what I was doing. What were they doing? Suitcases of booze into Downing Street, partying and fighting, vomiting up the walls, leaving the cleaners to remove red wine stains. That's the difference. I was working, they were partying.
A voice coach, Christmas Eve. And why is he wasting the British taxpayers' money on the Chagos deal? Apparently, he has somehow managed to double the bill and potentially give away something we don't have to give away, spending the taxpayers' money in a totally irresponsible, in my view, way. Nigel Farage's trying to put this to him.
What do I say, Prime Minister, to 25,000 constituents in Clacton, including 99-year-old Jim O'Dwyer, who flew a full set of missions on Lancaster bombers as tail end Charlie, as they're losing their winter fuel allowance, feeling the pinch, whilst at the same time we're prepared to give away a military base and pay £18 billion for the privilege of doing so.
Mr. Speaker, he talks of panic. The only panic is people using the NHS who know that under his policy he wants to charge them for using the NHS. And what he should say to the people of Clacton when he finally finds Clacton is that they should vote Labour because we're stabilising the economy and boosting the Dems.
All very funny. He didn't answer the question then. Look, if you want to give away sovereign territory and then rent it back, you need to ask the Chagosians first, and then ask us, the taxpayers, whether we want to pay for something that is effectively already free. Of course, they didn't want to do that, did they? Perhaps we'd rather it was spent on our pensioners or our children, but the art of democracy seems to be dead with this lot. The Labour Party got in saying one thing and then doing the very opposite. Drunk on their majority, I think they believe that it gives them carte blanche to do what the hell they like. Like cancelling local elections where the public get to decide who their local councillors will be, especially as they're planning to put up council tax. Both the Tories and Labour are running scared. In America, this caused major uproars. Remember that? Many years ago, no taxation without representation. Then you've got Ed Miliband coming out with costly net zero schemes. First, it was £22 billion in carbon capture, which has failed everywhere it's been tried. Then it was to carpet the land with solar panels and pylons, working hand in hand with Angela Rayner, changing the planning laws so you can't even object. She's also demolishing Grenfell, which I actually agree with, but apparently not consulting the residents and so blindsiding them with the announcement. Yvette Cooper meddling with the internet, potentially damaging free speech, and Bridget Phillipson decolonising the curriculum, whatever that means. Who asked her to do that? Perhaps they should spend the money on protecting our children from knife crime instead of this guff. There are stabbings every day, but they don't appear to want to really talk about this. It's an epidemic. High on their majority, it feels like they're making policies on the hoof with no effective opposition who can stop them. Even when they know it's bad and the country hates it, like removing the winter fuel from our pensioners, somehow their MPs club together, ignoring the constituents and voting it in or shamelessly abstaining. This Labour government, in my view, are moving the goalposts of democracy. That's what dictators do. And we're the ones who have to actually pay for it. Well, joining me now, Labour councillor Dominic Moffat. Dominic, thank you very much for joining me. Good to talk to you. Dominic, the whole thing about the voice coaching, I mean, did that sounds a bit, I don't know, I feel there's something more than that. I might be totally wrong, and I'm sure I am wrong, but I don't know, it just sounds odd. Who would get a voice coach on Christmas Eve?
Well, good to be back with you, Nana, and thank you very much. Good to see you again after yesterday. Look, as you say, I'm not sure we can dig into the details of that and know why Keir had to see a voice coach on Christmas Eve. But what we do know is that when Keir and Angela were challenged on this, they committed to resign as leader and deputy leader of the Labour Party at the time if they were found guilty of any wrongdoing over breaches of COVID rules. Certainly not a promise that was made by the Prime Minister at the time, Boris Johnson, who indeed clung on despite widespread opposition for a long time following the time it became completely obvious to anybody watching that he had breached, and his staff and the team at Downing Street were breaching COVID regulations time and time.
Well, the point of this, though, is actually the time with which you could actually investigate this has expired, surprisingly enough. So we couldn't even look into it anyway, and if we did, nothing would happen. So ultimately, it would be a waste of time. So to me, it seems all very convenient. That is just my view. But hey,
except every investigation into the Conservatives found wrongdoing. They were fined for breaking the law, and every investigation into Labour, I'm pretty sure, was
but
found
they were
them
punished.
not
But they've been punished. They are toast, as far as I can see. So we can talk about them if you like, but they are toast. They've been punished for everything, and the British public would not vote for them. And this is why we are where we are, with a Labour Party with literally no opposition to many of the policies that they never mentioned in their manifesto. So this is the problem that a lot of people are having. For example, I mean, we've talked about the Chagos deal. Now, I know they continued something that a Conservative government had opened up, but many members of the Conservative Party had actually decided they weren't going to go ahead with it. So why on earth should they be literally giving away our sovereign land and then expecting us to pay double for what they actually said it might be to rent it back? It doesn't make sense. That's my money. That's the taxpayers' money. Why?
Well, as the old quote goes, they might say that I couldn't possibly comment whether the Tories had decided to go against it or not. It was the government's position to open those negotiations. I think it was 13 rounds of negotiation they'd already gone through, coming to this deal that we've got today. This deal is, as you say, one that secures for the long term our national security.
No, I never said that.
Putting our arms base on a legalised basis. The deal, the kind of situation where we're in the Chagos Islands at the moment, does not have the strength of international law. The deal that we're agreeing now is one that does have the backing of international law.
No, but we don't have to follow. We don't have to follow any of their advisory suggestions, and many countries ignore them, and we've ignored them. The Conservative government ignored it, and I don't see why the British taxpayers should be paying for it. Well, I'm just saying that we're expected to pay out for this from an advisory ruling that we don't have to follow, and nobody's really happy about it. The Chagosians weren't even consulted. So what authority are the Labour Party operating on to continue to spend their money on this particular deal?
What was clear at the last election is that the country were fed up with rule breaking. They were fed up with people who didn't follow the rules, and Keir has been clear. And this is the point again
we're
around
talking
the
about
rule
Chagos
breaking.
now.
No, but the point is about commitment to the rule of law, commitment to following regulations.
There's no law that says that we have to do this.
International law, whether or not you like it, does it to some extent.
We don't. No. It's an advisory. It was an advisory. You know, you can be advised to do something, you have to do it.
But this is about putting on a legal basis the occupation of a military base to use it for the long term. It secures our international relations in those areas and secures our security in the important Pacific area.
There's no deal. We don't have to do this, and it's our money. So the taxpayer is going to pay double. I think they start off at $9 billion.
But I think
now potentially it's 18 billion.
The bill hasn't doubled. The bill has stayed exactly the same. As ministers confirmed
this was in the press.
To Nigel Farage, that the bill had not changed, that the fundamental deal had stayed exactly the same.
No, the money, not the bill, the money.
The financial bill.
The financial
bill had stayed the same. And, he spoke to Stephen Doughty, he spoke to Keir. I think he spoke to Stephen Doughty twice in 2 days about this in the Chamber and in Westminster Hall. And the fact is he had these answers given to him time and time again. He doesn't like the answers, so he keeps bringing it up and saying it's not true. But nevertheless, it is true.
Well, look, the British public have not given a mandate for this, and I think if they're giving away sovereign territory, the British public should be consulted, as should the Chagosians.
They're not giving away sovereign territory.
Yeah, they are.
They are securing sovereign territory for another 99 years.
In what land are you securing something when you're already secure on it, and then you give it back to somebody who could potentially, the Mauritians, who don't really have any stake in it at all, who could then work with China on this? So how are you securing your territory? And it's going to cost you money now to rent it back. Just quickly tell me that. I've got about 20 seconds.
We've got a legal basis now for the operation of the Diego Garcia Air Base. That is a good thing. That is a good thing for our links with America. The new American government is scrutinising the deal closely now. The new government is scrutinising it closely, which is, again, strengthening that Atlantic alliance. We now have a legal basis for the occupation of the air base there for 99 years, not something we had before.
You know what? This is the problem. I think the Labour Party are tone deaf. Thank you very much, Councillor Dominic Moffat. Really good to talk to you. Right, well, today, Tory analysts claim that Ed Miliband's net zero crackdown on landlords risks a £4,000 a year rise in rents for the end of the decade. The Energy Secretary is planning to ban millions of owners from letting their properties from 2028 unless they make the green upgrades, and he's pressing ahead with the changes, which is despite Chancellor Rachel Reev's pledges to crack down on red tape, keeping extra costs onto businesses. Well, joining me now, property expert Julie Ford. Julie Ford, are people panicking over nothing? £4,000, is that a realistic sum?
I think it's realistic, but I also think it's a bit of an underestimation, to be honest with you.
Oh, wow.
The amount of money that landlords are going to have to pay to actually bring their properties up to the new C rating is going to be much higher than what the government estimates. At the moment, they're saying that it's going to cost between £6,000 to £7,000 per property to bring them up to a C grade. That's not realistic. Double glazing alone can cost that, and that may not bring a property of a lower grade up to the C. So I think what we'll find with any business, it's always passed on to the customer, and ultimately the tenant is the landlord's customer, so they will see an increase in rent, absolutely. So the landlord's covering their costs.
But is he right to do this? Because what he's ultimately making the home is more efficient so that the tenant may not have to spend so much on energy.
No, absolutely. And I completely understand the logic behind it. However, the practicality of it is completely incorrect. I mean, if you look at the government themselves, when they're determining how somebody is fuel poor or in fuel poverty, that means they're spending 10% of their income on their utilities, on their gas and electricity. And they use three factors, the government. They use household income, household energy need, and fuel price. Those are the three factors they use to calculate fuel poverty. Home efficiency isn't one of those. So if you change that, it's still not going to change people being in fuel poverty, because people in fuel poverty are the ones that are on the lowest incomes and the most vulnerable in society. They're the ones that Rachel Reeves has already taken the winter fuel payment allowance away from. And also the local housing allowance has been frozen yet again. So making a property more insulated, yes, it's going to save them, let's say, £400 on their energy bills over a few years. But what real impact does that have on someone who is self-disconnecting purely to be able to be either paying their rent or putting food on the table? It's just not a practical approach.
So very briefly, we've got about 10 seconds. What will landlords do in response to this, do you think?
Well, considering that 52% of the properties in the private rented sector at the moment are below this C grade, I think this is just another nail in the coffin for a lot of landlords to sell. And I think we'll see the private rented sector deplete quite significantly. And then what do we do with those 4.6 million people who are currently living in that sector?
All right, Julie Ford, thank you very much. Property expert Julie Ford there.